next was just try and give you what we hear repeatedly from district and school site committee members, which is, please explain to us the big picture. Tell us where we are. And Dr. Stevens just gave us one element of the big picture, which is where we are currently in terms of what school looks like in a pandemic. And then there is, where are we each sitting around a table, virtual table now, and trying to make decisions on behalf of the students and families and staff in this district that are going to serve them. And each of us, depending on what committee we've chosen to serve on, may only have a small piece of the puzzle, a slice of the pie, a piece of the picture. And so it can be helpful to just sort of situate ourselves, both in terms of the funding, because ultimately that's what we need to draw upon. We need resources in order to provide services, whether it's staff or whether it's things or whether it's experiences for our students. And each of those funding pieces plays into the overall picture of the big BUSD budget. So I'm here with my colleague, Michelle Sinclair, who will be speaking in just a moment, to try and explain to you how the big picture of the BUSD budget comes together and what your role is in making sure that those resources go where they should. So here is a pie from last year showing us that most of our funding, the big blue slice on the right, comes from the state. And Michelle will be telling you about that. LCFF, Local Control Funding Formula. If you've served on any of these committees, you know you're going to have to learn a lot of acronyms, unfortunately. But that state funding is the largest piece of that pie. But the second largest piece is some local funding. The purple slice represents Measure E1, which is the Berkeley Schools Excellence Program, BSEP. Measure E1 currently, last passed in 2016, and it provides nearly 20% of the funding. We also have other local resources, which we'll speak about in a moment, a maintenance fund and a BERA, the Berkeley Educators Recruitment and Retention Act, and then other little wedges that we all have to pull together and ensure that they work together for the benefit of our students. We considered putting one more acronym in the middle, but we put it over on the right instead, and that's the SBAC, the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee, and that is the one committee that strives to advise the superintendent on the big picture. Sometimes we have increased funding. I wish that were the case now. It's not. And we want to know where those resources should go. More commonly, we have cuts that we have to address, and that's been the painful duty of that body over the past year. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Michelle Sinclair, Director of State and Federal Programs, and she's going to walk you through the next slides. Thanks, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. As Natasha said, I'm the Director of State, Federal, and Special Projects.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the oversight committees. These are the committee of stakeholders, which include family, which includes parents or guardians, and sometimes staff members, and community members. The first one is the Local Control Funding Formula, otherwise known as LCFF. Again, we're going to throw a million acronyms at you, and you don't have to remember them all. The LCFF also includes what's called the supplemental funds. There's an oversight committee for that funding, and that's called the Parent Advisory Committee, or the PAC. The plan that we produce is called the Local Control Accountability Plan, otherwise known as LCAP. The next committee is BSEP and BERA, which is the Berkeley Schools Excellence Program, and it is that other funding source part of the pie that Natasha talked about. They have what's called a Planning and Oversight Committee, otherwise known as the P&O. They create a BSEP and BERA plan with annual plan updates. Then there's the BSEP site funds, and that could be, well, what happens is a part of the bigger BSEP pie is allocated to each site. So each site runs their own committee that oversees this funding. And that they also, in addition, oversee Title I funding if the school receives that, and or PTA funding. And those are called the school site committees. SSCs. And look at all these acronyms here. Another committee that could be at a school or that is at a school is called the ELAC, or English Language Advisory Committee. There's the PTA, of course, Parent Teacher Association. Each school sends their own representatives for our two committees I just talked about prior. They send a representative for the PAC, and they send a representative for P&O. And so at the site level, they're going to create what's called a school plan for student achievement, which is otherwise known as a SIPSA. The local control funding formula, or LCFF, was signed into law in 2013 with the intention of providing resources more equitably to students with learning and socioeconomic barriers, and also to provide greater flexibility for educators to serve and respond to students' needs. Berkeley received nearly $90 million last year in LCFF funding, which is nearly 60% of our total budget. A part of the LCFF is what's called the Supplemental Funding Grant, and that's approximately $5.6 million. It's represented in this, if you look at the two pie charts, the smaller pie chart in the light blue area, that's the LCAP, or LCFF supplemental portion. Next slide. Okay, as part of LCFF, Berkeley receives extra funding, which is that supplemental part I just talked about, and it's based on the number of low-income English learner and foster youth students. The chart shown here represents two things. First is the first three that do not have asterisks are socioeconomically disadvantaged English learners and foster youth. This is our percentage in the district in 2019-20. And those are the three categories, as I talked about before, who represent our supplemental funds. And then the asterisk groups are other additional disadvantaged focus groups in our district that we just also need to identify and keep an eye on and consider in all of our decision making. We receive funding based on our number of socioeconomically disadvantaged English learners and foster youth on what's called an unduplicated count, which simply means that any student in one or more of those groups would be counted only once in the calculation. Okay, the PAC group, Parent Advisory Committee, another acronym, PAC. The PAC is a group of parents, staff, and community members who review and comment on the 3-year LCAP plan. The LCAP is an important component of LCFF, and all school districts are required to prepare an LCAP, which describes how we intend to meet annual goals for our students and the specific activities we are planning to do that address state and local priorities. There are 10 state and local priorities. I'm not going to go into them all right now, but that would be our focus. The LCAP focuses on supplemental supports for equitable outcomes in those 3 general areas: high quality classroom instruction, culturally and linguistically responsive systems, and safe and welcoming schools. And this actually is the same as our site plans. They have these same funding priorities, general areas. This school year, the Parent Advisory Committee will be overseeing the development of a new 3-year LCAP plan. And I just want to encourage you to check with your principal. If you don't have a rep yet from your site, I welcome you to come along. And that's my portion of it. I do want to add, I noticed in the questions that somebody asked about if the funding for supplemental funding has changed due to COVID. My answer to that is no. Some of the requirements have changed, but the funding has not changed. But we did receive additional COVID-19 response funding, and I'm not going to go into that tonight, but I do want to say that if you're interested in learning more about that, we presented on October 7th, and we'll be presenting again on October 21st about the usage of those funds. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Natasha Beery.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And now I'm just going to talk about, now that we've talked about the state funding a little bit, going back to that next wedge, the local sources of support. We're really lucky here in Berkeley that our community has stepped up repeatedly to support the schools significantly. And there is just recently, it was just March, just before the pandemic hit, we were all celebrating the passage of several measures at once. There was a renewal or another bond that pays for our facilities, the rebuilding of our schools and important construction projects. That was passed. There's a bond oversight committee that you are welcome to become a member of. You are also welcome to become a member of another committee, which is actively recruiting right now for oversight of the funds that come from a special tax that pay for the safety and maintenance of our buildings. That's actually a particularly interesting committee right now as we think about how to navigate this pandemic and how we need to adapt our facilities. So that is also available. You can go to our website to look for information on the maintenance. There's actually a quick link that is, I believe it's called local bonds and taxes, and you can find the links to each of these committees. The two committees that I work with closely are it's actually one committee now, the Planning and Oversight Committee, the P&O committee that was mentioned previously, which began its life overseeing the funds from the Berkeley Schools Excellence Program, passed most recently in 2016, but the BSEP funds were first created in 1986 as a response to the devastation of that Prop 13 wrought for funding of public schools in 1978. We put together this funding formula to be able to address more funding for the schools in a way that was somewhat unique, whereas there are caps on how much you can establish taxes based on the value of your home, and the bond, for example, is based on value. We were able to construct a tax, actually copying the way a tax was set up for our local Berkeley Public Library, based on the square footage of the home. And that's how the Safety and Maintenance Tax, the Berkeley Educators Recruitment and Retention Act tax, which funds our educator compensation and other programs, and the Excellence Program. And each of those has reports and plans that are attended to by the committee. These are public meetings, anyone can attend them, and we post them online. And then we also just want to call out that in addition to these supports from bonds and taxes, we have substantial support from various charitable organizations. The Berkeley Public Schools Fund has stepped up in a big way with putting together the Ed Hub that I hope you've all heard about, a point of distribution of materials and resources. It's been a phenomenal partnership. Prior to that, they had been doing grants and volunteers for the school, and they pivoted with the pandemic to really go where the need was the greatest. And of course, many of you may also be involved with other forms of support, such as your PTAs or the High School Development Group or the Berkeley Athletic Fund. All of these together are crucial to the success of our kids. Just want to give you a quick look at this brand new funding source. The Berkeley Educators Recruitment and Retention Act just passed in March. This was created to address the significant difficulty we were experiencing with recruiting and retaining our educators based on the fact that our compensation compared to other local districts had really fallen. I think we were number 16 out of 18 at one point. So again, the community stepped up and agreed to provide a significant increase to our educators. 95% of that fund goes to increased compensation. 5%, which is not insignificant, actually this year it's about $450,000, is going to special programs that we're just kicking off this year. We're increasing pathways for classified staff to develop their abilities possibly to become teachers or to enhance what they do to support the success of our students. Other programs as well, and again, that's part of the Planning and Oversight Committee. Most of you, I hope, are aware that the Berkeley Schools Excellence Program is 20% of what our budget is overall, and most significantly has, since its inception, paid for nearly a third of our teachers. So 2/3 of the budget, 66% of the now about $32 million per year, goes towards providing more teachers so that we have smaller class sizes across the board. board, but we also provide multiple other community needs and student needs. All of our libraries are funded by BSEP. Almost every book in every library and every other resource, and all of our staff, music and VAPA, instructional technology, special student support programs, and then Michelle referred to this earlier, just over 10% of the budget goes to each site on a per capita basis. And that's where you, if you serve on a school site committee, come in. These BSEP site funds, this past year, I was able to allocate $305 per student. And so that comes to a significant amount of money. Certainly at a place like Berkeley High, that is getting very close to $1 million per year, a really significant funding source. But every school has come to deeply depend on this source, particularly as one of our other sources that was referred to, Title I, which is based on the number of low-income students, has, as our community has gentrified, become less available to our schools. And so that's really created a pinch, and that's where BSEP has been able to partly step in. PTA funds also step in. So together, if you serve on a school site council, and hopefully if you do so, you're not just serving alongside other folks who've been elected to the school site council, but pulling in representatives, using this school site council as a hub to have discussions that include your ELAC, your English Learner Advisory Committee, members of the Parent Advisory Committee that works with the LCAP supplemental funds, the P&O and the PTA, all of you hopefully asking some of the same critical questions about whether those resources are doing what you hope they're doing and going where they are most needed.